Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I am Vidhi Bhutra and this is Global Pulse, our daily space to take a look at global media's take on India. We look at a wide range of media reports, from original ground reports from field correspondents to opinion pieces by renowned columnists. Let's begin with the Wall Street Journal today. Columnist Sadanand Dhume argues that India's affirmative action system offers an important lesson, not just for India but for the United States. Dhume draws on comments made by author Gurcharan Das during a public debate in Delhi last month, where Das contrasted the trajectories of India and China. For Dhume, the comparison comes down to meritocracy versus affirmative action. He points to China's Gaokao University entrance exam as an example of what he calls the country's brutal meritocracy. As Dhume writes, it enables bright students from poor backgrounds to compete with students who are privileged but less talented. By contrast, Dhume argues that India's reservation system has increasingly become a political tool, with parties using what he calls the rhetoric of social justice to expand quotas and win votes. His message to the United States is blunt. For the US, where liberal politicians espouse a mix of identity politics and ever expanding racial preferences, the Indian experiment should be a cautionary tale, he writes. And Dhume finally concludes with the argument that how India handles affirmative action could determine whether the country emerges as a significant world power or remains a perpetual also-ran. It also matters outside India's borders, he says, because no other country has imposed such wide-ranging quotas for as long as India has. Next, to the New York Times. Gautam Adani is back in the headlines in the US despite the Department of Justice dropping its criminal case against him in May. Reporting for the New York Times, Santul Nerkar and Nicole Hong explain why. In a legal filing on Wednesday, Adani acknowledged that he had offered to invest $10 billion in the US as part of efforts to resolve the criminal case. However, he said the proposed investment played no role in the Justice Department's decision to drop the charges. So why is the case still alive? According to Nerkar and Hong, the latest filing came after federal judge Nicholas G. questioned the Justice Department's decision to dismiss the indictment and ordered additional explanations. As the reporters also note, it is highly unusual for a judge to scrutinize a prosecutor's decision to drop charges. They write, Wednesday's filings were the latest twist in a high-profile case that has unraveled in a peculiar way. The report further notes that Adani is represented by Robert J. Giuffra Jr., who also serves as a personal lawyer to US President Donald Trump. Now we move on to Kashmir. The BBC reports that authorities in Jammu and Kashmir have ordered educational institutions to review books and academic material for what they describe as inappropriate and objectionable content. Reporting for the BBC, Sheldon Mullen and Aqib Javed say the directive applies to schools, colleges, universities, and coaching centers. It covers not only textbooks but also research papers and academic theses, requiring institutions to identify content that could violate religious sentiments, laws, educational values, and established norms. According to the BBC, officials insist the move is not about restricting reading. Instead, they say it is aimed at removing material that is factually inaccurate or unlawful, including content that promotes, glorifies, legitimizes, or justifies terrorism, violent extremism, secessionism, and radicalization. But the order has triggered criticism. And as the BBC reports, opposition parties, academics, and students say the move is an attack on academic freedom and an attempt to erase Kashmir's turbulent history. And finally, over to the Financial Times. Alan Beatty argues that many of today's celebrated international deals are receiving far more credit than they deserve. Writing in the Financial Times, Beatty says these agreements are often presented as evidence of a dramatic new global order, when in reality, they are relatively limited in scope. Referring to the India-EU trade agreement in particular, he writes, when the EU and India agreed to rather shallow trade deal back in January, it supposedly reflected the coming together of two great strategic powers, united by a common geo-economic purpose, and so on. Then he says, you know the drill. He argues that several other headline-grabbing agreements in recent years have had little to do with trade itself. He points to the recent EU-India security agreements and the Australia-UK-US or AUKUS Submarine and Technology Pact as examples of strategic partnerships that are not trade agreements. His larger point is that preferential trade agreements are designed for peacetime economic cooperation, covering tariffs, regulations, and intellectual property. They are far less useful during trade conflicts, and he argues have done little to prevent China from using a wide range of tools to strengthen its strategic position. He ends with a reality check. To speak of a new order is itself somewhat misleading. In geopolitically sensitive areas, there will be no overarching governance or legal framework, just coalitions or bilaterals of convenience with a bias towards politically friendly countries. This may not sound inspirational. It is, however, much more realistic than imagining that taking the knife of a traditional trade agreement to a critical products gunfight will end up in anything but defeat. That's your Global Pulse for today. Thank you for watching.